So, welcome to another episode of Myth, Mushrooms and Tea with myself, John F. White, and Simon Davis. And so, today we're going to talk about a number of things.
Mm-hmm.
But the first thing I want to discuss is a festival you went on
Ah.
recently, Simon, which I have a general question which I tend to like talking about. In fact, was Jesus a real person?
Hmm.
But I do understand you have actually seen Jesus in a way.
I did see Jesus. How mad is that?
And how did you see? Were you participating in mushrooms, or was this a?
So this was a non-mushroom event. There were no mushrooms involved. So it was interesting because I did a breathing technique. So in this festival, very often you find there's like food tents, and you find there's areas for healing and people to do massage and Reiki and reflexology. So there was a shaman there, a shamaness, and she was doing a guided breathing technique with sound bathing. And my wife loves stuff like that. She loves the sensual sounds and so on. So she said, I really want to do it. So I said, okay, let's go in and we'll give it a go. No idea what was about to happen. So we go inside. This shamaness lays us down. She's got all the animal furs on and leathers. She's taking it serious. She's really gone for it. And I remember her mentioning that she's been training by going around the world and visiting shamans in Siberia, in Indonesia, South America, just learning about their traits and their rituals and so on. So I guess it's a reconstruction. So on my tree of religion, that would be a reconstruction religion. And she wanted to guide us through this breathing technique, and it was well, I really enjoyed it, thoroughly enjoyed it. It's something I would do regularly because it was so relaxing. So she started off with these breathing techniques, which is engorging oxygen into your lungs. So you had to breathe in twice using your stomach or your diaphragm, and you had to suck the air in. So you have to do 2 deep breaths in and then 1 breath out. So it's like this. And you're doing it in a cycle, repeated. And I found straight away I started feeling lightheaded in a very nice way. And then after doing that for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, she then transitioned it to like a hyperventilating kind of breath. So it was so you're really breathing heavily and profoundly, getting as much oxygen in as you can. And we did that for a few minutes. And now you're starting to really feel heady. You start to feel very, very lightheaded. And the last part was you do a profound deep breath in as high as you can, filling your lungs in. And then when you get to the top, you hold. And then within a couple of seconds, she goes, right, sip in another bit of breath. So you go, you get a little bit extra in. So you're full like a balloon. You're just sort of floating there, tripping on oxygen. And I felt incredibly relaxed. And then she said, breathe out. And when she said breathe out, something happened to me. I just let go of my breath. I just exhaled, relaxed. And I felt like there was so much oxygen in my blood that I didn't feel the need to breathe. I've done it before where you hold your breath. You're trying to fight with somebody so you can hold their breath the longest. And I can do quite well in those games. But you always find at the end, you're like shaking, just shuddering because your body's going, I need air. But this felt so different. I was deeply relaxed. My blood was so oxygenated. I could feel that my when I was listening to my body, it was going, yeah, you can lie here as long as you want. That's enough oxygen for a while. So I just stopped breathing. Now you are meant to stop your breathing. She wants you to just stop and hold it, and then breathe very shallow if you need to. I didn't even need to. I just didn't breathe. And Sue, my wife, was next to me. She thought I was dead. She's like, "What's going on? He's not breathing. He's not breathing." I was deeply relaxed, and I went into a state similar to what I've been in before, where I was doing meditation. I was doing this sort of transcendental meditation years ago, and they get you to do deep breathing techniques to relax yourself. This felt like that, but even better. I didn't see anything necessarily happening straight away. I was just very relaxed, and all of a sudden, I noticed that when my eyes were closed, I could see light globules everywhere in my eyes. So you can see darkness and sort of vague blobs of light. So you'll find the same thing if you close your eyes, you'll see it. And if you put a torchlight in front of your eyes and then take it away and close your eyes, you see the torch in your eyes still burnt into your retina.
Yes,
yeah?
yes.
So it's kind of like that. You're just seeing these blobs. And I started having I think it's called pareidolia, the pareidolia effect, where you're seeing faces in things that aren't actually there.
Hmm.
So, for instance, you look at the clouds, and there's a cloud bursting game, isn't there, where you look at the clouds and you try to see if you can see a dog or a cat, and you say, "Oh my God, I can see a tree in there," whatever. That's pareidolia, where you're seeing things that aren't actually there, but your
Yeah.
brain is trying to project meaning on it, and you can see it in the clouds. Well, this was pareidolia on a whole new level, and this was quite amazing. I was looking at the light blobs in my eye, and I started thinking, "Oh, I think I can see an eye." All of a sudden, the light globules moved and took the shape of an eye, so I could actually see. It looked very much like the Eye of Ra. It had that Egyptian look, and I thought to myself, "Wow." And I just kept looking at it. I thought, right, I'm just gonna relax now and let myself go to this. Whatever this is doing, I'm gonna do it. And I just looked at the eye and I just said, right, whatever else is gonna happen, I'm just gonna look at it and see where it takes me. And it started changing into the sign of Zoroaster. So the prophet from Zoroastrianism. You know that classic image where he's a man with large wings stretched out either side of him.
Hmm.
So I saw that image. Then it changed into the yin yang symbol. Then I saw a woman with dreads, and she reminded me of a character I saw in Yoruban mythology. Then I saw Jesus, and there he is. Jesus was there. So I saw a man with a beard, and he looked Jesus-like, if you like. Then I saw a Buddha-like face and other symbols, and it just kept moving. Now, I was watching this rationally. I wasn't reading into it. I was just like, right, let's just try and figure out what's going on here. What am I actually seeing? And the best way I can define it is that when you look at clouds, you see something like maybe a face, and you tell somebody else, "Can you see that face?" And they go, "Yeah, I can see that. I got it. I can see the same thing." So they're recognizing it. But in this version with the light globules, as I thought I was seeing something, it would take that shape. So it's almost as though I was you're constantly projecting meaning onto things whenever you see them. When I saw these light globules, when I projected the meaning of what they might be, the weird part was how, unlike a cloud which stays as it is, these light globules were reforming. So I was trying to think, am I seeing the point where mind, the meaning of the projection of meaning, is meeting with something so vague and amorphous, like globules of light, that your brain, rather than trying to fixate on a stuck image, because the light globules are so abstract, maybe it was able to reform it. And so where the meaning was being generated by my mind, it was actually having a more psychedelic effect on what I was seeing. I can't explain it. It was just incredible. It was a very visual experience, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But it went on for several minutes before I took my first breath in.
Oh,
So
well.
there we go. I saw Jesus.
So, I mean, could it be that you were no longer seeing light globules, but your mind was projecting
Yeah.
that image in your mind? Yeah, you're imagining you're seeing that, and that's why they form the shapes you
Yeah.
thought.
And of course, I've made the Tree of Religion recently, and I've been looking at these symbols all day long for weeks and months and years on end. So very often I was seeing those symbols, and I thought, well, that's obviously heavily sort of structured in my consciousness now. That poster. So the fact I was seeing those again and again, I thought, well, I'm definitely projecting something personal onto that. But it does raise the question. I've heard psychologists talking about this before, how you don't realize that when you're seeing things, your entire life of education, cultural norms, and cultural sort of motifs and things are structured into your mind. So we're always projecting meaning onto things, aren't we? So we don't realize it, but we can actually change something with how we perceive something, the way we interpret it can change our experience of it. I'm trying to think of an example. If you've been brought up to be scared of a certain of strangers, and when you see a stranger walking towards you, you project onto them things like "could be dangerous," "stranger," and so you behave differently because of that. So yeah, we're just
Particularly
constantly,
prevalent in racial bias and the like
yeah.
kind
And
of
we don't
thing.
realize that the mind is projecting that as much as an image is being projected into your mind. You're projecting upon that image your own thoughts, ideas, expectations, and values. So it's just an interesting psychedelic experience.
That is really, really interesting. So, and that because I do think about this and how our ancestors used different experiences and to have sight. And there's a lot of talk about the use of mushrooms and cannabis and the like. But there's also, I think, a lot of misinformation about that. And whilst there's no doubt a drink going on, certainly in the Near European cultures, we see a story about a drink, and actually in the Near Eastern culture. So this is probably from early agricultural times, if not before that. Certainly, the descriptions of what were happening seemed to be more like caffeine overdose rather than mushrooms and that, by how they're explaining it. But I wondered, if you combine all that with breathing and certain things, you end up in this state that makes you imagine
altered state of
things.
consciousness.
And certainly if you're in a state where you're feeling unwell, because there's lots of talk about vomiting or needing to go to the toilet, but we're taking it. I wonder if that causes particular thoughts to come to the forefront.
Do you mean feeling ill by taking something like ayahuasca makes you feel ill, doesn't it? You
or
vomit.
something like that. Yes. Well, does that make you think of certain thoughts? And if so, why are people thinking of Jesus?
Yeah.
Because you were happy, or what? Or is it?
It's just. I mean, it might literally be like the cloud. If you see something that it might have just been literally a light globule of the canvas of the tent in a certain way, where you think you see a beard, and then your brain does the rest. It just fills it in. But it was interesting. It was almost like the brain was filling in information. You're a magician, John, aren't you? You've got a good background in magic. So
I used to do magic back a long time ago.
Well, a friend of mine, he was a magician, and he taught me loads, and we almost started a little magic act together years ago. And he showed me something I couldn't believe. I couldn't get my head around it. If I say this now, I'm going to be giving a magic trick away. Is that naughty?
It's okay. It's fine. That's fine.
I feel bad because you must never break the magic code and explain how tricks work. But this one is a visual. It shows you how your perception's working. And it shows you how we take so many things for granted that what we see is what we're seeing. And very often it's not at all. So with magic, my friend was going to do a magic trick on my mum. And he said, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this little playing card and I'm going to force it on your mum. She's going to choose the 3 of diamonds, whatever it was. But he put it on the window on the outside of our house. And then it was nighttime. And he got some black sugar paper and he put it in the front of the window on our side so you couldn't see it. But when you look at it, as soon as you look at it as a magician, you're thinking, well, there's black sugar paper sticking on the window. It's obviously there. I can see it. Nobody's going to come in this room, not see that. And it's going to ruin the trick. This is just silly. And he went, no, trust me, he says, your mum will not see. Your vision's not working the way you think it's working. Exactly. This is why I love magicians. They've hacked the mind. They know how it works. So when my mum came in, first of all, the attention's on him. Hey, Brenda, how you doing? Let's get my deck of cards here. And he was doing these tricks. And he looked around a bit. And she's not looking behind her. So anyway, he's got the cards, and he forces eventually the 3 of diamonds onto her. So she's picked it, and in her mind, she picked it. He puts it back in the card and he probably palms it and hides it. So now he says to my mum, is this your card? And she goes, no, it's the 2 of hearts. It's not my card. And he goes, is this your card? And it's the Jack of spades. No, that's not my card. So he does it a few times. He goes, this trick isn't working. So he takes the deck of cards and he throws it at the window, hits the black sugar paper, which falls off. All the cards cascade all over the floor. And the only thing that's left on the window, stuck to the window, is the 3 of diamonds, if that was the one. And my mum was flabbergasted. How did you do that? And I thought to myself, it was there. She could have seen it, but the brain doesn't work that way. The brain, when you go into a room, your attention is so focused on whatever you're looking at that you can, first of all, you can just miss loads of things. I'm one of those people. I miss all sorts. And unless you're told otherwise, your brain just accepts what's there. So if it sees a dark window, your brain goes, well, that's nighttime, and that's not relevant. There's not a lot going on there. There's a guy here with magic cards. This is what I'm focusing on. But the brain would have seen that sugar paper, but it was irrelevant. It just was all merged together. It was abstract. So it was just a dark region of the room that was just, my mum just didn't consider it. It just didn't become part of her conscious experience. So yeah, the brain's a funny thing, and you realize that what a lot of the things you're seeing aren't necessarily
The
what's
brain
there
fills
either.
in, so the brain makes makes up a lot of information,
Yes,
and that,
yes,
I mean, there's a very common illusion. There's Hamleys, a famous toy shop in London,
yeah,
in
been
England,
there, yeah.
and they have, I don't know if they still do, but they used to have a magician's sort of corner on the ground floor,
Mm.
where many famous magicians started their trade. And you go in there, and one of the tricks they do is pick in like a card, like a nine of clubs or something. And he said, "Do you know how I knew you were going to pick that?" You go, "How?" I said, "Well, look around you." And you look around and you realise there's about 500 nine of clubs posted all around the floor, like
Mm.
on college, right in front of you, on the ceiling, everywhere, which you just didn't see
Yeah,
when you walked in. People,
yeah.
as you say, just totally oblivious to it. And the other thing magicians are very good at is making you think things happened when they didn't. So if you explain a trick that happened to you, you'll say things, oh, like the magician put the card back in the pack and must have palmed it or whatever, because that you think he put the card back in the pack. Chances are he probably didn't. You know, he just
Mm.
put it straight in his pocket or something. But you make this story up in your mind to make it all make sense.
Mm.
And you hear that when you hear people talk about the tricks. Oh, he did this and he did that and he did that. You know, and the best tricks are making people think they know what happened to make the trick work. And when they go through it, they realise actually that couldn't have happened because the trick could never have worked if that was the way it happened. And then,
Mm.
well, how did they do the trick? So they get a double whammy
Yeah, yeah.
of that. And Darren Brown, people like that are really good at creating that sort of
Darren's
immersion.
brilliant. I watched a TV episode before where he he plays with the unconscious. So he deliberately had somebody driven to the studio where he's going to do this magic trick. And I seem to remember he had placards outside on buses and all sorts going on, which had information that he was, how would you put it? He was
Mm.
unconsciously
Subconsciously, yeah, yeah.
putting an impression on them. So he would have cards, the three of diamonds, and then he'd have three something. It was always three something, and it's just putting these symbols and ideas and icons in people's heads. So by the time they got to the studio, they didn't realize that unconsciously they had all this information in their mind, and he'd already forced a card without even having a deck of cards. He'd forced it, and when he played around, he started saying things, and they were like, "How did you know that? How did you know that?" And then he said, "People think this is spiritualism. They think it's I'm reading using some kind of spiritual mechanism. I'm doing mediumship and psychism and so on." And then he proves at the end it's not real by saying it was all unconscious impressions I implanted into your mind along on the journey, and he shows them when he did it. And so yeah, that's an interesting one for me because I consider myself a spiritual person, especially in my 20s. Less so now, but I was very much into the new age kind of world. And when Darren Brown and Richard Dawkins came along, they really challenged me because Darren Brown was very much like the Houdini of our day, because Houdini did the same thing. He debunked spiritualists, and Darren Brown was doing the same thing. And in doing that, you sort of like, you're showing how the mind works. You're showing how you can implant things in there, and it was a great argument against the esoteric, the spiritual, because it just made sense and it worked. So yeah, people like Darren Brown make it very hard for to believe
As
in
I
people
say,
like Jesus pulling fish out of the river and so on, because you can
mm,
say that's a magic trick. You could totally do that.
but as I say, Darren Brown, those things aren't actually what happened to make the trick work. So
Go on.
even though so he's telling you
Ah,
the reason this happened is because we subconsciously planted all these things to make you think
right.
it. That isn't what happened at all.
So that was a misdirection.
Yes,
Oh
yes, that's what I'm
wow.
saying. He's very good at doing that because there's other things. There's a thing called dual reality,
Mm.
and there's a clip going around at the moment with Piff the Magic Dragon. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a British magician who dresses up as a dragon and does. He's got a good dry sense of humour, but he tells a child to pick a card and read what's on the card.
Hmm.
And he says, read this card. And the child says, I can't read. And everybody laughs. He says, no, read the card. And the child goes, I can't read. And what's written on the card is, I can't read. Yeah, so but the audience doesn't know that, and there's
Yeah,
many
yeah, yeah.
tricks based on that where you get the there's a sort of dual meaning to words. So what the
Yeah.
participant sees is sounds very different to what the audience hears,
Hmm.
but it's actually the same thing because you don't realise it. So yeah, I love all that sort of stuff. This dual
Magic's
reality.
clever, isn't it? Magician magic, because it's playing with perception, it's playing with the mind. You know, it's misdirection. It's always trying to do something to your perception or the way of thinking. As you said with that kid, using dual language, it's even playing with language and how we use that to
No,
con
that's a
trick
really
people.
powerful one. But there's lots of things like that. But hypnotism and things like that are sort of real, but they only work in particular circumstances and particular environments. It's there's a really interesting thing like the British Broadcasting watchdog Ofcom has a rule saying you can't hypnotise people on telly
Hmm.
for fear that people at home would be hypnotised. And this was written in the 50s and 60s when they thought this was really going to happen. Obviously, now we realise that it doesn't happen, but there will be people out there who think they're hypnotised by watching the telly. And that just goes to show the human mind is quite susceptible to
Yeah,
wanting to believe things as well
yeah, yeah.
as that. So it's all fascinating. But yeah, I used to like doing magic, but it gets a bad rap as though you're a particular kind of person if you want to perform magic.
I've noticed a lot of people debunking magic these days are on TikTok. So
TikTok. Oh yes, it's
I've
just
noticed a lot of people using TikTok to debunk magic, and it's just like, guys, what are you doing? You're taking the magic away from magic. You know, that's what keeps it magical. When you take it away, it loses its powers. So
exactly.
it's a
Yeah, yeah.
shame.
So it's only the simple mechanical tricks they're doing quite a lot of. I mean, to say the dual reality stuff is very different.
Mm.
But yeah, that's great. Yeah, and Devon Brown, I say, was particularly good at that. But let's circle back to this Jesus chap.
The
So
Jesus, who may have been a magician, by the way. I was thinking about this the other day about him pulling all the fish out of a boat, and I was imagining like somebody hiding behind the boat and just having like 10 buckets of fish and chucking them up. He's going throwing all these fish around, saying, "Look, I'm making fish out of just nothing. I'm just pulling them out of my hat." He
yes,
could have been a magician.
there's a trick we got with sponge fruit, like sponge bananas. You can pick one up and show them. I've got a banana,
Yeah.
and you sort of pretend to put it in your pocket, but you palm it, and you've got another sponge banana, and it pops out. With your other hand, say, "Oh look, I've got a banana." You take that. As you take that, you swap sponge banana, so it looks like you haven't
Yeah.
got one, and then another one comes, but you put that in your pocket, and you've got a constant stream of bananas popping up. So perhaps he did that with sponge fishes. I don't know. But anyway, the question asking is, do you think Jesus was a real person? Do you think he was a son of God, or two, do you think there is just a rabbi or something going along that stories are based on of being
Mm.
Jesus, or did he not exist at all? Do you have
Well,
any views on that?
I've been. This is one of those things you just every now and then catch yourself thinking about, and I've moved around on this one. So I think one of the things I remember hearing is that there's no actual historical evidence that we found,
Sure.
archaeologically speaking, and no records of him ever existing. So that's just worth noting
Mhm.
that in the Roman Empire, where they were renowned for recording everything, including somebody's stool sample or something, and everything was recorded, you'd think that somebody as significant as him in the time he appeared would have been recorded. So there is that, which I think is a very important point. I know there's some people out there say no, there is some stuff, and I
And obviously, it's been forged. We see so people quote people like Josephus a lot, who talks about it. But what we find by analysing his text is that the parts that are about Jesus have been inserted later on.
hmm. Oh,
Right.
right, right.
So yeah, they're in effect forgeries.
What would the text have said? Are you saying that if the text was inserted later, does that mean there's an original text? And if there was, what was that actually
Yeah.
talking about?
We can see that when you analyse the earliest texts we have, the passages that mention Jesus are written in a different linguistic style.
Mm,
So it's all written by the same person, but we see the linguistic style
right.
change. So someone sort of added an extra line in there themselves as part of the transfer process or rewriting of the story.
Okay. Okay. The other thing, we've mentioned this once or twice before, is there are mythical characters around at that time, not just Jesus, but Mithras is one that comes to mind. Buddha. So 500 BC up until zero, or the first year AD. Up until that point, there's quite a lot of religions which have a lot of similarities. I think the Mithras. Do you know much about that one? How closely linked it is to Christianity?
I wouldn't say it's closely linked. It's quite a different religion, but I'm familiar with it. But you've got Dionysus and things like that, who has a very similar storyline to Jesus
Hmm.
from a few hundred years earlier. And you see, and people forget the Gospels of the New Testament were written by Greek scholars
Hmm.
who were trained in writing by studying Greek texts, and many Greek texts have, Zeus fathering a special child from a mortal woman,
Hmm.
which just coincidentally Jesus
So
happened to
funny. Now, here we go. Weird coincidence. I listened to that story today on the radio.
which one, Jesus or Zeus fathering his?
Dionysus,
Oh, right.
and
I don't know. Okay.
with the story where Semele, I think it was Semele, was a
Hmm.
human, and it was the first time a god had been born from a human. And if I'm not mistaken, Hera was so outraged when she found out he had yet another affair, and he actually had. I mean, really speaking, you'd think Dionysus was a demigod, but I think he's the first god to be born from a human. And she was so outraged, I can't remember what she did exactly now, but she tricked Zeus, or the woman. That's it. She told the woman, ask Zeus anything you want and he will have to give it to you. And she said, well, I would like to see him. And of course, if you look at a god's
Yeah.
true form, you're in trouble,
Right.
because it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
looking at the sun. It'll burn you to pieces.
Right.
So Hera forced that to happen. So Semele then saw his true form and she died.
Yeah.
So Dionysus then, didn't he have to go into Zeus's body or something? You have to remind me on that bit.
I can't remember. I can't remember. I mean, there are various versions of the story, but he sort of almost like dies and is reborn,
Yeah,
sort of
that's
thing,
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and all that. I mean, the thing I guess that gets me about Jesus. So I don't believe there was a son of God walking around the world because I don't believe in God, and because there are so many stories. However, and so I don't think Jesus existed in that sense. However, what the big argument I heard, I think it was may have been Christopher Hitchens. I heard this from years ago,
Mhm.
was that if Jesus is made up, Jesus of Nazareth, as he's known as, made up, why did we have, or why were there stories created of him going to Bethlehem and being born in Bethlehem and coming back? Why was that needed? Because that causes a lot of issues. Yeah, why did Jesus' family travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem and back again? There was no census at that time and things like that. So it seems odd that had to happen
Mhm.
unless there was something real in place that forced that. Because if you're making up a story, you can get rid of the bits that cause complications and just stick to the things that are true. But the fact there are some weird things in the story suggests that there may be elements of truth about a rabbi or a wise person or someone a rebel telling these stories.
Mm. That's the bit where I get to, where I think to myself, although there's no historical evidence of Jesus, the fact that the the Jesus story has been so impactful on this planet and on world culture, um, and I just think to myself, there was loads of people going around
Mm-hmm.
proselytizing. How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, prophetizing,
Proselytize.
prophetizing, I guess you'd call it, would you? But yes, I mean,
They were preaching teachings and so
yeah,
on. So
well,
it was, if you traveled back to the Silk Road between India and Greece and all between, around the Near East and so on. You'll find people in all the towns, speaking sermons. People talk about religious revelations. I think it was a very, they call it the axial age, don't they? So it was a time of great sort of spiritual exploration and people having their own ideas. And I'm sure there was loads of people that didn't stick. But I suspect if Jesus was real, he was one of these people, and he'd collected teachings, which is why I was going back to Mithras, because I'm pretty sure I read about a link in the story of Mithras to the story of Jesus. So I wondered if he'd gone around collecting stories from Mithraism. So we've got evidence of Mandeism, and I think it's pronounced Manchiism. So those are two religions at the same time as Jesus. And again, you look at those stories, and the story of Buddha, you've got somebody who is enlightened, has an understanding of higher power. I just think that all of these stories were interacting with each other. And I think if Jesus was real, he's one of the people who looked into these scriptures, these ideas, and potentially put something together. Obviously, the story he put together and that he told was so powerful that it's changed the entire Rome changed over a couple of hundred years after this. So I think he put together some ideas, some stories, collected them. Maybe I don't know whether he was sacrificed, and certainly don't know if he rose from the dead afterwards. But I do think there was potentially a real Jesus. Just when I think of it like that would have inspired this movement. And so, John, Luke, and Matthew, I would like to think if they had written this authentically about a real person, that they are relating it to somebody that they knew this person directly. Is that right? Again, I'm
No,
not a
no,
Bible expert.
not at all, because
Not
Matthew,
at
Mark,
all.
Luke, and John weren't real people. They're names we apply to the Gospels, and they were written long after Jesus died.
Are we
So those
talking like
people,
a couple of decades or?
yeah, at least 2, maybe 3 decades after
Okay.
he died, if our numbers are right. And John was like 60 or 70 years after he died. So, and you can tell that they're copying each other.
Mm,
Like
mm.
Matthew and Luke are copying Mark a bit, and I think he is, and then John goes off in his own way. But there are just rewrites of those. I mean, to me, I think Jesus, if there was someone there, he was a martyr figure for how he stood up against maybe the Romans and for
Mm-hmm.
religion. Uh, but we also have to bear in mind there was a few things going on as well at the same time. So the Jewish temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 CE, and that caused the Jews to some of them to change how to think, because if you haven't got a temple, how can you worship? But Jesus, you don't need a temple. You can worship at home. So it's easier to worship Jesus and God than it is to worship in a temple you haven't got. Um, the Christians used to give food away at sermons. So he said, if you come and listen to our stories, we'll feed you. You can listen to our stories if you're a woman or a child, which Mithraism wouldn't have. It was a purely patriarchal
So
type.
they were doing something maybe that the Romans weren't doing. They were
They were doing.
feeding the
They
poor.
created a very popular religion.
Hmm.
They hit all the mark in terms of marketing. They hit the sweet spot at the right time. If Jesus was 20 years earlier, or well, let's say 50 years earlier or 50 years later, probably wouldn't have happened. We'd be worshipping something else right now.
I remember reading a book about the formation of Christianity after Jesus, and it mentions how over time, when it becomes monetized, that's when people start saying, "Oh, religion becomes an organized religion," and then you start seeing the shadow side coming in a bit. But he was saying that before that, it was actually quite it was very much uh, full of acts of kindness. There was so much kindness coming out of so much charity, so much compassion. It must have had there been anything like that in the Roman Empire before? Were there any people renowned for their great kindness, compassion, and charity? Is Jesus one of the first people to bring
Well,
sort
there
of?
was, but it was in particular groups. It was just that the Christians encompassed the whole family rather than just the head of the household, in
Mhm.
effect. He didn't just look after the warriors and the soldiers. He didn't just look after the big businessmen. He looked after everyone.
Mm.
And from that point of view, it worked. And you get these reflexes all the time in religion.
It
So
worked for me because I mean, can you imagine living in a world where you just feel like you're an outcast, you're a fourth class citizen, way down on the hierarchy, and all of a sudden this religion's saying we're equal. There's food when you're starving. We're treating as many people as fairly as we can. Yeah, it was. That's a profound thing to happen in a place where maybe it was focused on just the rich and the elite and the people who protect them, like the warriors. So it was not. It was probably a harder time. I imagine Christianity just brought love, compassion, kindness, and people suddenly thought, this is what we want. We want more of this. We don't want constant wars. We don't want hate. We don't want
mm.
tribal warfare. We just want to get on. We want everybody to be looked after. And so,
And on top of that, you just had the one God,
yeah, it
which
makes life
was a
easier.
key messaging around that. Certainly you're in Rome, where it was picked up, and the Roman Catholic Church came along to really put Christianity, well, it's the Roman Empire under a different name, but put Christianity on the map. It was a lot easier to have one God than many. There's I say it was just a perfectly made religion. Well, not
Do,
all the
do you
reason.
think why do you think they dropped down to one god? Do you think it was easier and it just got away with a lot of complex rituals that were cluttering up everything, or do you think it was an insight where they'd come to a decision that actually no, this is right. There's one god versus the many.
Well, no, the thing is, there are many gods. So even in the Bible, we see the original text. The Bible, we see references to multiple gods.
Yeah,
That God is
God's wife's in there, isn't there? She Ashra.
Asherah. We also have in Deuteronomy how God's father split up the lands of the region, and God got Israel.
Hmm.
That's so, and that was God's land. So people who studied the Bible were well aware that God was a child of other gods.
Was
So at
was
some
God
point,
was his father El, the
yes,
Canaanite?
yes,
Yeah.
Elohim. Although God could be called Elohim as well, but yeah, it can be regarded as that. So he's a Ugaritic. For the Ugaritic text, we see that. So just the Canaanites, as you say, like which were before the people before
Hmm.
the Israelites. In effect, they've went to them, and they've got many stories that the Israelites borrowed for the Old Testament. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
again, every as I keep saying, every religious story, there's an older religious story.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
put out
It's just a
that.
remake, isn't it? It's like I said to you before, Titanic is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, and
Mm,
Romeo and Juliet could be Tristan and Isolde, and keep going
exactly,
back and back and back.
exactly. That's all it is. And but they hit on a good formula, and it worked. As I say, if you had to relive the last 2,000 years again, I think the chances of Christianity happening would be slim.
Can I put to you an idea I had based on when I made the Tree of Religion and speaking with you? Um, I had a theory about how monotheism may have formed. Um, do you want to go there?
Yeah, why not?
So, um, I was trying to figure out what point did our ancestors say there's one God and we should do away with all the others, and this is a misunderstanding. We've kind of got it now. These are priests and holy men and other sacred thinking people trying to understand the nature of reality. I think it's a human curiosity. We're always trying to dig deeper. I'm certainly always curious and looking deeper into the nature of reality. And I I've read about Atenism, which is the first version of monotheism I ever saw, where Akhenaten, the pharaoh, I can't remember what period it was, like 2000 something BC. He seemed to be the first person we've got in recorded history who says, "Do you know what? We've got all these Egyptian gods, and I think there's only one. And he's a sun god. He's a creator. He's Aten." And so he did away with all of the other gods. He said, we're going to stop worshipping these. And we don't know much about why he came to this conclusion, but it's something that he had ordained. Whether he'd come to it philosophically or whether it was for practical purposes, I don't know. But what I do know is he started to prevent the priests from worshipping the old gods. And that obviously didn't go down too well, because when he died, they smashed every single one of the motifs and the images of Aten and went straight back to the old gods and said, no, we're not doing this. So it was like a failed attempt at the early form of monotheism. And then the next one that seems to be the one that appears is Zoroastrianism, where obviously it's a
Mhm.
dualistic religion, so they have a god and a kind of a devil-like figure, if you like. But it was very much about this is the one creator, this is the one God of all things. And I thought to myself, okay, so that seems to be the first working model of monotheism. That makes sense to me that this could be where it started. But when I was talking to you about the Indo-Europeans, I wondered if it actually started with them. So I'm going to pose to you a theory, which is that I was learning about the story of um, Manu and Nemo,
Mhm.
and I was watching this on your channel, and I'd read about it in Michael Witzel's book. You see the cosmic man. Is that the motif we use for that? The cosmic man, but who basically embodies the entire cosmos at large. So
Primordial twins is usually, but
yes,
yeah, there's a yeah.
yeah. So in the Norse mythology, we have Ymir, who is a giant frost giant, so big that when Odin and Vili and V kill him, they're able to use his form to create the
Yes. Yeah,
sky, the moon,
primordial
the stars,
yeah.
the sun, and had the blood becomes the rivers and so on. So
Mhm.
he substantiates the world of the gods, Yggdrasil, the tree, the earth realm, you name it.
It
He
provides the material for the world and the
yes,
humans to
yeah.
be.
And then you've got Prusa in
Mhm.
the Vedas,
Nine point,
who
yeah, to produce him.
he is sacrificed by priests at the time who I think is it 1/3 of his body stays in the heavens and then 2/3 of his body goes down to the lower realms. But he substantiates the physical world and he also connects us to the spiritual world, and he represents everything, the entire cosmic sort of scales at all levels. He is all things. And his wife then represents, or his sister, sorry, represents the feminine aspect of all that. So it's not just one god necessarily, but you start to see in the Indo-European thinking that there is one being that sort of substantiates the whole thing and connects everything, and then lots of lesser beings, then lesser gods that sort of then take charge of the winds and take charge of the moon and take charge of the sea. But I was looking at that idea and I thought, well, that idea seems to be a precursor towards monotheism, because it's the first time I can see our ancestors regarding like Pangu is a great example. Pangu has taken that mytheme of the cosmic man. Pangu is inside the egg of creation in terms of mythology, and when he breaks out that egg, he is the egg. He is the life form that was inside the egg. The egg itself, then he uses that to create the heavens and the sky, and then he himself dies, and then his body continues to add and substantiate the world. So again, there's this level of sacrifice there. Either they willingly sacrifice themselves, or somebody else sacrifices them. Is there any examples where they're sacrificed beyond their desire to be sacrificed, or is it always
It's always their desire to be
right?
sacrificed.
So there
Now,
we go.
if it's Manu or Yemo, sometimes the cow is
That's right.
sacrificed.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that to me, I just thought to myself, is that a precursor of a being that represents all reality? And then as a precursor, we know that the Indo-Europeans get hold of it because we see it in their Zoroastrian texts. And Maharajda, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah,
He's the all. He is all things. He creates all things. He's the creator being. Represents light, enlightenment, and
they
goodness.
do. I mean, but when the Zoroastrian texts were written, they did their best to erase all history of the Indo-European religion
Yes.
from them. They failed, and so you still see the hints of the twins in Gaumart and
Hmm.
Gaumart
And the
and
cows there as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Gauls there. You get the flight of Zanara, or I think it's probably pronounced Canada, which is around the transfer of um, spirit between kings and the like.
Mm.
So I don't think it's monotheistic in the way.
Well, I'm presenting it as a
Yeah, but how
precursor to
religion.
give you the tools to make the jump from polytheism to monotheism. So I'm wondering if it was the seed of the thought.
But, so Judaism was going on, 1,000. I mean,
BC.
about 1,000 BC, you see, Asherah. Well, you still see him as a god with a wife. So
Mm.
in effect, multiple gods, although not necessarily. his wife may not be at the level of godliness that
Mm-hmm.
God was at, Yahweh or Elohim. Um, but you still see that disappears later. So I think it's just simplification, and we see simplification all the time. But I mean, although it's rare to experiencing it happening in real time, but we do see it. We see it certainly in the Old Norse texts. So, for example, Loki, everybody knows like Loki, the sort of evil god. Um, he gave birth to Sleipnir the horse and Hel, the goddess who rules the underworld. But he also gave birth to the wolf.
Yes, that's right. That's it.
Um,
Fenrir.
but it's not. So the wolves are called Fenrir's children.
Hmm.
So Loki's original name was Fenrir, but over time, simplification made the wolf's big name was Fenrir, and Loki loses that name.
Is that referring to the two wolves, Skull? I can't remember the other one.
Garmr and
The moon wolf and the sun wolf.
oh no, they're different wolves. No, they're different. Yeah, Fenrir the wolf for the end of the world. That's
Mm.
Loki's child, and they say there's Garmr as well. It's probably part of that litter, but because they were called Fenrir's wolves, they were just sort of Fenrir. So you get this simplified version that the wolf is called Fenrir. So I think in the same, it's not quite the same, but in the same context, people want to simplify things naturally, and so I think we see that's why monotheism tends to work. Plus, it's also a way of pushing back against other cultures who you didn't like and their way of doing things. Get
Mm.
these reflexes of stories,
Yeah,
reflexes of
you want to establish
things are
your
turned
own
upside down.
culture.
And I think that's
Yeah.
part of that. And if God is the son of another God, that's fair enough. But you can then forget all those gods because your God is the best and the strongest, so could wipe out the others. But yeah, I think if you didn't have to talk about other gods, then it's a lot easier to spread your religion. I mean, if you went to church today and in the sermon, the vicar
Mm.
or priest talks about, and in Deuteronomy, you see that, God defeats the other gods or whatever to get hold of Israel, then you're going to get a lot of questions asked, aren't you?
Well, the version you're putting forward it's economical. It's just easier and it's streamlined, and it allows it. It's easier to share it because it's just a simpler version of
It's a
the
lot
idea
easier
of a
to
religion.
explain, and you need that. You don't want to have to be answering questions all the time. Why is this God and why is that God?
I
Isn't it?
I I'm not so sure on that one. My take is that they were making an insight and they wanted to express that through story, through symbolism and metaphor. And I think they actually thought that it was ultimately one divine mind ruling over the cosmos, able to have its agency and to make things happen. Um, I see it more like that because I remind myself these are highly spiritual people, deeply embedded in the idea of the sacred. Everything, remember before how we started when we were saying we project meaning onto things. So I was projecting the symbols from my tree of religion onto these light globules, and it was literally reforming the light so I could see it in a certain way. Um, I think our ancestors, were deeply spiritual, and I think that's the lens they were seeing through. So I do think they, rather than for economy and for the idea to spread a religion more easily, and this being, I mean, it's nice, it is parsimonious. Monotheism just makes everything much easier.
It works
But
hand in hand with that. I mean, because as much as things are simpler, then it makes sense. Actually, it is simpler to explain with just one God.
mm-hmm.
So actually, not. I don't want to just do it because it's easier to explain, but just having one God is easier to explain.
Yeah, I guess, and then in itself, I guess that parsimony makes it easier for the average person to take it and carry on. Because if they
Exactly,
have to explain it to somebody else, if they've got to go right, let me explain Greek mythology to you. There's a lot of gods.
exactly. And look at that, and the whole of the Near East was Greek speaking. You
Yeah,
had the Greek, and then the Romans came along with all their gods. If you had to change, you wanted to rebel against them, and they have multiple gods, then do you have multiple gods or do you just have
yeah.
the one God that is superior than all your gods? That
That's the
sounds a lot
story of
better.
Moses, isn't it? Where the two priests put their staffs on the ground and they turn to snakes. They look at the power of our gods, And then the Moses God says, "Well, I am all. I am all gods." And then it turns into the snake and eats them, as if to say, "Yeah, we are all one." It's just like that symbolic moment where it's saying, "I am the one. This is they are, all things
But
come
he's
from me,"
not
and so
saying
on.
there aren't other gods. He's just saying he is the most powerful god at that
Yeah,
point.
how do they explain that
Exactly.
in the story of Moses? Isn't it? Shouldn't it be like those gods aren't even real? I am the only god. Is rather than saying I'm actually battling against you.
I mean, it would have been better for those sticks not to turn into snakes. But God made that happen, yeah, which is one of the
Yeah,
many problems of religion.
yeah.
But no, but again, it's the Bible acknowledging that there are other gods.
Why
It's
did
just,
God allow the other gods to, which don't exist because He's the only one to turn them into sticks?
exactly.
It's funny when you look at religion, you start looking at the plot holes. It's like modern
Mm,
storytellers today. They've got to put their books through all of these editors and producers to look for the plot holes, and they let audiences have a look at it to go, "Oh my god!" But they didn't have that back then, so hence why these stories are so full of plot holes. You're like,
exactly.
hmm,
Contradictions and yeah, the like. It is,
I, yeah,
it's like the Earth was made before the sun, for example. That is in the Bible. So,
yeah,
and we
yeah.
all know that isn't the case because you sometimes get people who believe in the Bible and say, "Oh, the Bible was ahead of its time because it knew there was a beginning to the universe."
Mm, mm.
He goes, "Well, that may be true, but whoever knew the beginning of the universe didn't know the Earth was made after the sun." Yeah, so it sort
This
of
is
fails a lot
this is
most things.
why I get a bit frustrated with holding on to. So I appreciate tradition and mythology and old stories. I think they belong. They're like museum pieces. They belong in museums because we should look at them in wonder. We should look at them in awe. We should be amazed that our ancestors were able to put these ideas together. That they'd gone from very primitive beginnings, living in caves and huts, and through their ideologies and abstractions, where they were able to think in complex ways, they created civilization, technology, religion, and set us on route to civilization. But when we look back on these things, they're so full of holes. And I always think to myself, we should respect our ancestors for where they got us to, but we shouldn't venerate them so much that we hold on to these texts today and still try and force these things to be relevant. It's so difficult to do that when there's so many plot holes and it doesn't make sense. There's so many contradictions and paradoxes. But just to finish off the point, I don't look upon our ancestors who came up with these things as fools and as completely misunderstanding the nature of reality. They were doing the best they could with what they had. And I do remark, I find it remarkable, I've said this to you before, that they seem to have intuited certain truths. Like I love looking at the story of the Big Bang, and I love looking at the story of creation in places like the Bible and Greek mythology and Siberian mythology, because you always notice how, without trying too hard, there are parallels. That I've told you before about in the beginning was the super force emerges from what we call nothing, and that super force contains all things, everything that's with us today, all matter, all energy, all dimensions are inside that super force. And it's they explain it like a particle. It's like one thing. And of course, as I mentioned before with Pangu in the egg, that's one god in one egg. That's all there is. And when it opens out, it substantiates all reality. And that's very much somehow our ancestors intuited through all the world myths, not just things like the Bible. All the world myths, they to some degree they came up with this concept which kind of metaphorically stands today. So I do marvel at what they did, and I have a lot of respect for it. But ultimately, when I see people today taking these texts as seriously as they do, I think to myself two things. One is some of these were made in the Bronze Age. They were made in the agricultural age. They were made in times where we didn't even know basic things. We didn't know germs and about how to protect ourselves from things that we just so much we didn't know. And if God said we're all knowledgeable, they should have been able to tell us these things, but they didn't.
Exactly.
So, although
Exactly.
saying that, there is a god in the Aztec mythology that does tell you to bathe very often to avoid getting disease. So there is a few examples where the gods did
Mm,
tell you to do that. Wash your hands.
yes.
There was a goddess that
Exactly.
did that in Aztec mythology.
Mm.
There was another one that tells you to there was another one all to do with excrement. The Aztec gods are off the scale. I've never seen anything like them. They are completely different to the Greek gods. But yes, I do you think religion still has a place today?
I think the way society has developed, it needs religion. However, what I wanted to say about those stories is that um, I gave a talk a little while ago about the creation or foundation myths of Europe. And across the whole of Europe and all these different countries and regions, there's only a few myths. The myths of the creation myth of Greece with Kronos and Zeus, for example, we see traced back to the Hittites, Phoenicians, into the Near East, and the and almost back to the Enuma Elish in effect and how it works, where you get this matricide and patricide.
Mm,
We get uh, myths that are turned into folklore in Eastern Europe, which are around the Earth Diver, which have been changed into the god and the devil.
mm,
Then in England, we have in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles Hengist and Horsa, so divine twins, coming up, and we see Manu and Yimo in some of the in Germanic and Old Norse texts. But that's really about it. We have these sort of four different creation myths covering the whole of Europe,
mm,
and the details have been changed depending on the region they're told in. And for me, these people must have known that at the 2,000 years ago, they must have known about others' myths and the details have changed. So to me, it isn't the fact about we're telling these stories and they've got details in. The whole point of religious stories is just to justify an ending, to give credibility to what they believe in. That the actual details of the story do not matter, providing it says, and in the end, this is the way things are. But when
mm,
you've got a story that says that, that's all you're worried about. You don't know about what happened in the plot and going up to this is the way things are, but you just need the this is the way things are bit. Um, and so from that point of view, religion is nothing other than justifying why you live the way you live.
mm. Yeah, it's giving you your values. It gives you a sense of meaning of where your place is as a farmer, or whether you play if you're a priest or if you're a king. Sort of telling you this is your place, divinely created by how things were
If you
established in
believe
the
that
past. If you
religion,
believe that,
if you want to fit
um,
into that way,
yeah, but it gives you for those people there was a sense of meaning because those myths said, "Oh, right, so I know who I am now. I'm of
Mm,
the warrior clan, and this is my role." Or and it gives you purpose, ritual. You do that daily to make yourself accustomed. The rituals are clever, aren't they? Because that's a way of constantly reminding yourself about the nature of
exactly.
reality,
Really
your place
important.
in it, and
Keep
what it
retelling the
means.
myth again and again, so you
Yeah,
don't forget
yeah.
it.
Do you think we've lost? Do you think in losing stuff like that, we've lost something important about culture that's leading to a little bit of one person, I think John Vervaeke calls it a meaning crisis. I think he's a philosopher, and other people just say it's that there's a downward trend. There's been a sort of disintegration of morals and ethics and values in society in the last 20 odd years. Funnily
They're
enough, at the same time as
two different questions. I think
yeah,
losing sacredness has affected humanity. And we talked about this in the last podcast, the movement from a annual cyclical, is that right?
mm,
Am I saying that right?
cyclical.
Cyclical, that's it. An annual cyclical cycle of events every year, so you knew what was going on, to a canonical meaning of life. I think that has affected things a lot, but I think science and the contraception, particularly, has really affected society.
Mm,
And I don't. It's hard to say. It's just certainly just feels like the how would you put it, the etiquette and manner and behaviours of certainly the society I've come from 50 or even 100 years ago has changed so much
mm.
to now that you've lost a lot. But we must forget that 150 years ago, many people living in poverty and had nothing, and
Yeah, kids were
now we've
climbing
got
up chimneys
housing.
and breathing in soot and dying at the age of
Exactly.
40
So
or
it's
30.
like it's almost like swings and roundabouts. So we've lost stuff, but we've also
Yeah.
gained stuff, and no doubt, living today, we're living a better life today than we did 50 years ago, without doubt. the better education and things. But
Steven Pinker said many of us in the working class are living like kings did in ancient Mesopotamia. You've got certain luxuries at place that they would have killed for. Having a television and access to Netflix and a really good series of Squid Game or something.
yeah, no,
We
yeah,
forget how much comfort and joy we have in lives compared to even
and they're
even
very
kings didn't
easy
have.
for us to get. Yeah, which is why you need stories to remind you about things.
Yeah.
You know, this is the way things are, and I think in a way you need. Yeah, I don't know. It's yeah, I don't. But I would rather scrap religion if I had a choice. I think well, not necessarily religion. I would scrap large religious institutions such as the Roman
Yeah.
Catholic Church. Which are I'd say I think Christianity is a good idea. When you see communities and people like that working together locally, I love that. But when you see a large organisation like the Roman Catholic Church with some abhorrent things going on, which is supported, at a organisational level,
Mm.
that and them they're standing up for Christianity and all the good things that was meant to be. I don't get that at all. I detest the church in that way.
Mm. Yeah, it's I think there's so much change. I mean, even watching in the 80s and 90s, as I was a kid growing up, and I saw homophobia being quite common in I was in South Wales, and you just saw it all over the place. And slowly there were movements to push back against that. Um, Civil rights and so on, just pushing back. And you slowly saw through our media, through the newspapers and stories and personal accounts, you just started seeing that we were lacking humanity
Mm.
as a people generally um, towards minorities. And I saw religion struggling to explain why it could, because there was a large religious underpinning of homophobia from the fact it's not natural, it's not in the Bible, it's again, I'm not an expert in the Bible.
Such hypocrites as well.
Does it
Like
actually say anti-homophobic kind of things in there?
I
Is
don't
it in the New Testament, for instance?
I don't know. I hear I don't know what exactly says, um, but yeah, he probably says a man should not lie with another man or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's
So again, this is why when you look back at Stone Age people or Iron Age people trying to make sense of reality and make sense of biology, it just I struggle when they are not willing to accept the scientific enlightenment where it shows us that homosexuality is genetic. It's there when you're being baked in your mother's womb. It's just
it's a modern. Our labelling of it is a very modern thing as well. I mean, because sex with anyone was practiced in Greece and
mm.
Rome. Doesn't and
If
almost
we
any.
read the Greek myths, it's anyone and anything. I mean,
Yes,
Jesus.
so yeah, it is a really modern thing of how it's labelled and treated. Yeah, as much as I think racism is. I mean, I, I think 2,000 years ago, I don't know if there was racism like you see today. I mean, obviously, people it would be unusual to see people of different
Mm,
ethnicities. It's
mm.
rarer, but I don't think they would be treated, like we see people treated today for the colour of their skin.
It'd be
It's
interesting
so
to see the
strange.
history of Egypt because they got Semitic people to the east, they got the Grecians and the Europeans to the north, to the south they got Nubians.
Well,
So
that's
there's
where the term gypsy came from, isn't it? Where
right,
there was
okay.
that is a European thing where they considered anyone with darker skin came from Egypt. They're
Mm, mm,
Egyptians, which
mm.
got shortened to gypsies.
Right. Ah, makes
So
sense.
yeah, it's as I say, a lot of it seems quite modern and national. It may become maybe part of the nationalism movement, I guess, and where borders are starting to be defined and the world being chopped up and people. I think that perhaps where it really came into its own. But it certainly, yeah, for all the benefits of modern life, we have taken some steps backwards, I'd say.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Never thought about that. Yeah. So yeah, I just think that the problem with a lot of religions is they say, I know Islam says this is the final prophet and the final
And these
reading.
kind of words, yes.
None shall come other after. But that's a tough thing to say, because then when the Enlightenment comes along and shows us things that clearly make so much sense, to reject that because an older book says differently, because the man has been divinely told, and this is far better than science. This is
Well, an angel
divine
came down,
knowledge.
yeah, a man who couldn't write wrote down all this stuff that was
Oh
told
right.
him by an angel that visited him and decided never come back to Earth again. Yeah, it's like,
So
I,
Muhammad couldn't write, or how did he
no,
have
I
to get
think he
somebody
was
to write it?
illiterate, or
So he had to
certainly,
get somebody to write down for him.
and in fact, if you call him a warlord, that upsets many Muslims apparently. But I think the general consensus in history is that he was a warlord. He led armies.
Hmm. That and did he again? It'd be interesting to learn more about this, but I still don't know the history as much as I should do. But I seem to remember that when it first emerged, it was more peaceful, but it became it took to the sword and to fighting to try and get its message across and to push back against other people who weren't willing to listen to the message and so on.
What, a bit like
Became
Christianity
Yeah.
and many other religions. But predominantly Christianity did, had a very successful turn
Did,
at that.
was Christianity pretty? Did it used to teach to get people into its flocks with the sword? Are you saying that
Have
was
you not
a?
heard of the Crusades?
Well, I thought that
That
was a
was
pushback
genocide at
against.
its finest.
I thought that was the Muslims coming up against the Christians and
Oh, that was
friction
also
and tension.
Christians, trying to get land back. Whoever had it, they wanted to spread the word and go to the Near East, to the Promised Land, and have that for ourselves. And then you had the French chap who basically committed genocide on many of the Germanic tribes.
Is that Charlemagne?
Charlemagne, yes,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
absolutely, with the backing of the church. The more you
Mm,
convert
mm.
or heathens you kill,
That's
the
true.
more money you get.
I remember that now. That's a bit of
They
history you
don't
reminded me
let
of
them
there.
determine
Yeah.
this either, do they? There's all sorts of, as I say, Roman Catholic Church not impressed.
No,
Gets
no.
gets an F in terms of religious organisations on my tier ranking. Perhaps I should do that.
I'm sure there's loads of wonderful things. I'm sure there's loads of wonderful things that Christianity's done, and Islam and Shintoism, but we don't tend to hear of those because it doesn't make the news, does it? It's just,
No,
you
it
know.
doesn't. No, they do help, but as I say, it's and I think belonging to a church is really good for the community, really good for people. When I send my kids to church school, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the larger organisation and the things it supports.
Well,
Well, just seems so wrong.
I just think religion needs an update. I think, and it gets updated all the time, because when I made my tree, I noticed every 1,100 years or so there was always these new religions evolving. It's like the Baha'i faith is one I've become quite
Yeah,
familiar with recently, and that's a relatively new one. Somebody sent something to me on YouTube the other day, showing me a new religion that's emerging, and it's got rituals and singing and aesthetics all being developed. So I'm going to look into it. I might do a little post on it, because I did say on my Faithscape channel I would show people any new religions. So I was like, oh right, there's a new one. I mean,
mm,
these things happen all the time. They're cult like when they start out. They're small, but
you
it's
have to be.
gaining
But what are
followers.
the myths? What is the sacred truth?
Exactly. Now I'm writing a myth for the 21st century,
Mm.
so that we should negotiate and have a chat and say, hey, where's the myth? Do you want a myth? I'm making one now. No, I've no idea. I'm sure they have one. I'm sure they'll have one. I'll look into it.
So there's
That would
still
be
myths on
interesting.
eBay. You start a new religion, here, buy a myth, and there you go.
Yeah, buy a myth, insert it into your religion, and boosh, off it goes. That's what you need, isn't it? You need a myth if you're going to have a religion.
Who knows? There may have been such people 2,000, 3,000 years ago wandering the streets of Nazareth. Some chap came across this. Oh, that's a good idea. That's a nice story. I'll
Yeah,
start
yeah.
telling that. And here we are.
Oh well.
Anyway, on that note, I think before we dig a big hole and jump in it, because religion can be quite a sensitive subject, I feel
Yeah,
we should
definitely.
wind up for the day.
Before we get
Absolutely,
ourselves into trouble.
indeed. But these are the sort of chats we have. Fascinating chats going everywhere. I hope you all enjoyed listening to us wander around Jesus and whether he was real or not.
Yeah,
So
well, you taught me a few things there that I didn't quite know. So that's yeah. Just to quick check. Jesus, was he real? On a level of 1 to 10, 10 being
there
100% he
was
was
no Son
real.
of God. Jesus, the person you see in the Bible, 0. Jesus, a rabbi who influenced some of those stories, 5 out of 10.
I'm there with you. 6 out of 10. Yeah, maybe a bit more, but I think yeah, rabbi, real person, putting together stories from the time, seeing his own things, and maybe having his own experiences that genuinely made it into that book as well. So yeah, I think a real person.
Well,
Wouldn't it be
let's average it
fascinating?
out and finish on that and say, yeah, Jesus, 5.5 out of 10.
All right, we'll
That's
go with
that's,
that then.
that's the myth mushrooms a T rating for the
He
Son
was
of God.
probably real.
Probably someone who influenced him that was
Yeah,
real.
I'll go with that.
Excellent. Until the
100%.
next one, then, Simon.
Yes, to be
Take care, everyone.
continued.
To the pip.
Catch you again. Ciao, John. Bye.